Hey everybody, and welcome to Black Spring. And we begin today with the subject of a process, the election process. And to most Americans, it's a very unique process that matters. And with that, I'd also like to bring you to a statement from President Trump. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me here on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn.
Be prepared for mail-in voting?
No, because I think a lot of people cheat with mail-in voting. I think people should vote with ID, voter ID. I think voter ID is very important. And the reason they don't want voter ID is because they intend to cheat. When you get something, when you buy something, you look at your cards and credit cards and different cards. You have your picture on many of them, not all of them, but on many of them. You should have a picture on your for voting. It should be called voter ID. They should have that. And it shouldn't be mail-in, it shouldn't be mail-in voting. It should be you go to a booth and you proudly display yourself. You don't send it in the mail where people pick up all sorts of bad things can happen by the time they sign that, if they sign that, by the time it gets in and is tabulated. No, it shouldn't be mailed in. You should vote at the booth and you should have voter ID, because when you have voter ID, that's the real deal. Thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in to that particular segment. And I'd also like to bring you to a story. Of course, it comes from the TNA, the New American. Now, this particular story is written by Luis Miguel. It's entitled Surprise, Democrats Mail-in Voting Campaign Funded by George Soros. Now, efforts calling for the establishment of a vote-by-mail system to facilitate voting amid the pandemic outbreak are being pushed by liberal groups backed by progressive globalist billionaire George Soros. One of the top organizations behind the movement for mail voting is the Brennan Center of Justice, based out of NYU School of Law. The center received considerable financing from Soros' Open Society foundations and has been the beneficiary of several Open Society grants, receiving over $7,466,000 from 2000 to 2019 alone. In fact, leaked documents for the Open Society Foundations listed the Brennan Center as the recipient of funds earmarked for the express purpose of, quote, litigation to expand access to registration and improve ease of voting, end quote. Now, the center released an outline for reforming voting in light of the pandemic crisis, one that has been widely cited by mainstream media outlets in arguing for a universal vote by mail option. Quote, all voters should be offered the option to cast their vote or ballot by mail with multiple submission options as provided below, so as to enable voters to avoid lines at the polls and exposure to the pandemic, end quote. The Brennan Center writes. Outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Reuters, and Axios have all featured the Brennan Center document in coverage. Democratic Senators Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota and Chris Coons of Delaware have likewise cited the center's plan in a letter urging House and Senate leaders to provide federal funding for mail ballot initiatives. According to the Brennan Center's plan, quote, inactive and recently purged voters who may have been improperly removed from the voter rolls, quote, end quote, should be sent provisional ballots if they request a mail-in ballot. The Brennan blueprint also urges, quote, same-day registration, real-time address updates, and provisional balloting for certain individuals, end quote, though it doesn't specify who those, quote, certain individuals should be. The Brennan Center's plan has been advocated by activist group Stand Up America, whose massive nationwide program has included making 19,000 calls in one day alone on behalf of proposals. Stand Up America gets funding from 1630 Fund, which is managed by Arabella Advisors, itself is funded by a consultancy financed by far-left donors. Soros Democracy Alliance has recommended its donors invest several $1,000,000 into 1630 Fund. The ACLU, which regularly works with the Brennan Center, received $50 million from Soros Open Society Foundations. A coalition of left-wing groups are arming a multi-million-dollar campaign to not only alter the voting system in this election, but to also make universal mail voting a permanent fixture in future American elections. The progressive groups include the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers, Public Citizen, Common Cause, National Vote at Home Institute, and the Center for Secure and Modern Elections. Common Cause and Public Citizens are both funded by Soros Open Society Foundations. National Vote at Home partners with the League of Women Voters and Common Cause, both Soros funded organizations. Meanwhile, one of the funded organization members of the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers is Fair Vote, a project of the Soros-funded Center for Voting and Democracy. Leaked notes of 2014 Open Society Board meetings showed that the group has as one of its goals the expansion of online voting. The document said the Obama administration should, quote, assist states with voter registration modernization efforts, including statewide database improvements, vote by mail, online registration, and voting and same-day registration, end quote. These were in line with recommendations published that year by Obama's 10-person presidential commission on the election administration. Recommendations that included transitioning to voting by tablet computers and other digital technology. The commission posited that voters could, quote, pre-fill, end quote, sample ballots at home to be scanned later at the polling place, and stated the fact that a tablet or off-the-shelf computer can be hacked or can break down does not mean such technology is inherently less secure than existing ballot marking methods if proper precautions are taken. The pandemic crisis has been used by leftists as grounds to try to advance various items on their agenda. U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat of New York, a professed Democratic socialist, has called for Medicare age to drop to 0, end quote, and for the pandemic relief to be administered through, quote, lens of reparations, end quote. Pandemic deaths are disproportionately spiking in black and brown communities. Why? Because the chronic toll of redlining, environmental racism, wealth gap, etc., are underlying health conditions, she wrote on Twitter. Quote, inequality is comorbidity. Pandemic relief should be drafted with a lens of reparations. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have the centerpiece of today's segment. Now, are you surprised? That would be my tag. Are you surprised? You as the American voter, you as the American patriot. Because last fall, we saw pushback from voting rights groups founded by former gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams in response to the voter roll purges, a measure defended by election officials who listed maintenance as a way of making elections run more smoothly and protect against voter fraud in the state of Georgia. Now, also, of course, you have, coupled with that, media pushback. According to the New York Times, the push to limit voting options is in keeping with Republicans' decades-running campaign to impose restrictions that disproportionately affect people of color, the poor, and young voters under the banner of combating voter fraud, which is exceedingly rare. Democrats have more core constituencies among the nation's disenfranchised, and both parties have long believed that easier voting measures will benefit Democrats. Okay, so on to more of my tag on this. This is another classic case in which the Democrats are out of touch. I mean, how out of touch can they be, or progressive can they be? I mean, they assume that they are champions of this huge populace, but one thing remains that's evident to suggest that, yeah, Democrat cities, you do have constituents, that are living in cities that have the highest rates in crime, homelessness, illegal aliens, and strictest gun laws. I would argue that that's true. You do. Your constituents are very much suffering in your respective districts. I would support that, but also it's also a political tool to keep the keep the victimhood mentality going, that, oh, that these black and brown people are the, we have to coddle that group because we know what's best for them. Meanwhile, their problems and their solutions keep the cycle going. Now, let me know what you think, because I don't see anything really actually new in the fight against voter fraud, and I don't see why we cannot protect actual voter we can prevent voter suppression. If they just follow the process and leave the process as is, I think that it's more likely to have people show up and not try to implement something that's so new and so untested in a time like this. So let me know, what do you think? Do you think this could be a last free and fair election, or do you think the pandemic will compromise this process, or do you think that this is just another overreaction or a negative speculation and fear-mongering tactic from the left or the Democrats? Of course, I'd always love to know what you think. Please let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know what your concerns are. And if you'll hit the like or the unlike button for algorithms and other purposes on this platform. I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on this segment of Black Spring with Autumn.